Sounds great, Karen. We're glad you're here. And with that, we are officially recording and live streaming. So Sika, the floor is yours.
So good afternoon, everyone. I know it is late on a hump day, but we are so glad you joined us. As you know, you applied for funding, and unfortunately, this go round, you were not funded. Your organization was not funded. And we always think that it is important to talk about maybe some reasons that you were not funded, or some things that we noticed in applications of those that were funded versus those that were not, that may be helpful as you look to seek funding from CSC in the future. So by way of introduction, I'm Sika Rose Green, the Executive Director of CSC Leon, and I am so glad that you're joining us. So for the next hour, we are here to answer whatever questions you have. If there's anything that didn't make sense to you, if you have any suggestions, because we are not the owners of everything perfect in an application cycle, and are still learning and growing and evolving. So with that, thank you again for joining us, and I will turn it back over to Holly.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Sika. Glad that you're here with us. I think one of the things that makes us hopefully different from other funding funders that are out there is that we do see our providers that we partner with as community investment partners, and that is Partners for Success. That is our plan, is to work together with you so that you can build your capacity to be able to provide services. You can scroll through who is on with us today, just various community partners, members of our team, as well as Ms. Tynan from the United Partners for Human Services, which will become relevant closer to the end of kind of today's presentation. What we will discuss with you is kind of the purpose of the funding over the summer, and kind of just some information about the scoring discussion on those three components for relevant experience, project narrative, and budget. I would like to just point out that for the most part, like, applications were much stronger this summer than they were last summer, and that's going to be relevant when we get to the scoring piece, when we start talking about that. But please understand that we have a limited budget, so there's always going to be those applicants who are selected and those that are not. Our goal is to just help you grow in either that kind of bottom third or that middle third up to that top third. That is definitely our objective, and we do plan to continue our summer funding cycle at least into the foreseeable future. That may change in a couple of years' time, but we know that there is plans for another wave of summer funding next summer. In addition, just as a note, we are having other more longer term investments where the standard of evaluative rigor is going to only increase. So please know that our goal is to bring you along this journey with us as we increase the expectations of programming so that we can all get to high quality programming for our children and youth. So we are here specifically to talk about child and youth development and food insecurity. That is the program, the procurement that was published that you are all here. So if you're here to talk about family supports or youth mentoring, please know that that is not where we're having those conversations today. Those decisions have not yet been made. We're also not talking about family resource centers or any of those other procurements that are open and available. Today specifically is a conversation about the program funding to expand the capacity of programs to better meet very specific needs during the summer. We decided this summer, unlike last summer, to focus in specifically on child and youth development and food insecurity, as those were two of the largest areas that were identified in our needs assessment as being something that we could immediately fill the need for. That meant that we were looking for high quality summer learning programs that met very specific criteria and included a component that had this robust feeding plan that also offered kind of a cost-effective solution that paired learning with feeding. Now, some of you might just be here from the feeding component, and that's perfectly fine as well. Our goal for that was just to expand the availability of nutritious food for children, youth, and their families. Again, we were looking for cost-effective solutions from organizations who already have a track record doing this work. Summer programs were, while we were very interested in, especially around food provision, to have some innovative solutions for food provision, ultimately that won out with our desire to have cost-effective solutions. And in the case of summer learning, we wanted expansion programs only. So no new programs were actually funded under the summer learning component. So please understand, as I've said, that we can't fund everything. We received 42 applications in total with requests of more than $5 million. We had an allowance approved by our council of $1.6 million. What we ended up doing was selecting 17 applications that had an aggregate score of 70% that was rounded or higher. And technically that was just for summer learning. That 17th one ended up just being one under our summer feeding component. And that one, please know that we had even less money allocated for. They ended up choosing the application of over 80% for that particular one. So they tried to create the council tried to create equity in terms of what they chose to fund, but the vast majority of the funding was always intended for summer learning that had feeding components woven into it. In terms of next year, what they'll do has not yet been decided, if they will have a direct line item for summer feeding and summer learning, or if it will just be summer learning, or it will just be summer feeding. That has not been determined. Timeline for that next round of funding, we hope that we'll actually be able to announce the funding opportunity in October of this, like in the fall of this year. So that you have more time to prep and plan for what that application could look like, that you'll have more access to our capacity building services so that you can really strengthen your application for summer learning, or for whatever our summer bridge program will be for next year. So again, be on the lookout for that sometime this fall to help really know what we're going to be looking at for this next round of funding. So now we're going to talk about scores, and I'm going to explain this chart that you see, and then after I kind of go through the scores, we're going to pause and take questions, any specific questions that you might have. So what you see here is that there were different groups, and I'm going to call them, these are tiers. So we have those that were funded, that's the bolded amount. Then we have those that had scores within 15 points of the funded amount. And then those that might have been on our bottom tier that were less than, or a greater than 15-point spread from those programs that got funded. And I show this to you in each of the columns that you'll see here. These were the 3 areas that were graded. I didn't even put a total on here because if you want to see that, I can show you on the website where it is. But I really wanted to show you where the breakdown was in relation to the scoring. So under the experience from relationships, this area is where we really wanted to see what is your experience, and I'm going to stick with summer learning for first, and then I'll go into summer feeding. But for summer learning, we really were looking for organizations who had a track record and a mission alignment in the summer learning space. Have you ever provided after school programming or summer camps for children and youth? Like, what did that specifically look like? Unlike the year before, and many of you might have applied for programming the year before, it was very, very broad, and you had 8 categories of where you could kind of apply for. This one was super specific. We were looking for programs who understood what a high quality summer learning program looked like and had built into their structure evidence of that. And under that piece of relationship and experience, had experience doing summer programming and also looking at those relationships. And the relationships aren't just a reflection of who your your letters of support were from, although that's great if you have like a, a testimonial that you included. What we were really looking for is those letters of support from organizations that showed that you had reach into the community, or that you were leveraging some sort of resource. One of the programs that was selected for funding, for example, they included a letter of support from the location at which they're going to host their summer program that was providing that in kind. They were able to then show that while we're asking the CSC for this investment, we are also able to leverage our partners and our relationships in the community to acquire that space, what we call in kind or for free. So in essence, they're donating that. That was something that really stood out when you had the selected funders. When they saw that in the application, that really spoke volumes, as opposed to applications that might have included others like line items in their budget, for example, for those elements. The proposal narrative, I think that you can really see here quite a spread in terms of scores. So again, this top line that you see right here, that my mouse is kind of hovering over, these are the average scores of those that were funded. This second tier are the average scores of those that were in the next, we'll say almost funded, is basically what we're looking at. And then in this bottom tier, those are those applications that were pretty far from the mean, the average scores, maybe so that's what we're looking at. So you'll be able to find kind of where you were and really be able to take advantage of the capacity building that we're going to be able to provide to you as we move forward. So in this proposal narrative, that's really where you see this big spread, primarily because you had up to 50 points to score here. This is really the narrative of what you plan to do. Was it thorough? Was it comprehensive? Some of the applications that were not selected for funding included very short answers, or they just repeated the question. They didn't actually describe the plan for how they'll do what they'll do. When you had the opportunity to upload documents explaining, for example, your schedule, some of those attachments were not comprehensive. And while that does not apply to all of you, it might apply to some of you, and really taking into consideration that if you're going to submit an application for, say, I'm just going to randomly choose a number, $250,000 for a 2-month summer program. We had some of the applicants share with us, oh, I found out about it at the last minute. I only had about an hour to put this together. And so I just want to leave you with the message of, if you only spend an hour on a grant application, then you're probably not going to be selected, especially if you're asking for $250,000. So just kind of keep that into perspective as to staying in touch with us and making sure that you know about applications and that you're spending the time to write very thorough explanations for every question that is asked. That was another piece that we noticed when we were doing our review, is that some responses would say, like, already responded to, or see above. And we're asking the question to give you the opportunity to dive deeper into it. And then finally, the budget, I kind of mentioned that as well. Having a comprehensive budget, those that scored on the lower end didn't use the budget template that's provided. Moving forward, if you don't use the budget template, you'll actually be disqualified and you won't even be considered. We tried to be far more lenient with this summer because it was only our second application, but know that everything moving forward, if you don't use the templates provided, you won't even be considered. So that's kind of an overview of the learning. Now, within feeding, very similar to what we were saying as it relates to experience and relationships, is that we were looking for a partner agency who they're in that space, that have the experience, or they have relationships to offer a new and innovative way to deliver. And this is, I think, one of the hardest ones. We had some really amazing applications for feeding. And I think that that's reflected in the score that you see. On average, the scores were much higher in all of the applications for feeding versus those in learning. And unfortunately, it's just because we had less money to invest in that feeding realm. That might be something that is addressed in the future by having the council dedicate even more money. It might be addressed in a community partnership, or it might be addressed through asking people to form collaboratives. That was probably the hardest thing, is that when we look at our budget, 90% of the funds was allocated to go to learning, and only don't count my math. I did not do my math correctly there in terms of the 10% split, but it was the vast majority of the funds were designed to go to learning versus the feeding line item. Now, all that said, we recognize that there was definitely some confusion with the application process of learning programs and feeding programs, and there was definitely some crossover. So I want to be the first to share with you all. I'm not the first, actually. We share this with you at all your presentations, and we put it in your emails. Every single person who made an application for learning and feeding, but only ever intended to have a learning program with a feeding component, every single one of you were offered the opportunity to resubmit. And I worked with all 12 of you I had communicated with and was able to work that out. So please know that if there's concern, like, oh, some people got to resubmit some things or other people didn't, all of those who had an initial application that included learning and funding were given the opportunity to kind of compress both of them into one application, so there wasn't any confusion. Now, that of course still caused confusion in the application process, and we have remedied that moving forward. But we just want to be fully transparent that we know that the application itself could have been improved upon, and we welcome that feedback as we move forward.
Holly.
Yes, ma'am.
So I also want to add that as we move forward, I want to emphasize that collaborations and really looking at ways you can have certain things, certain costs, certain services in your camp, either sponsored or done through a collaboration, will probably be key moving forward. What do I mean by that? So for example, let's say that your camp has an art component, and you know that it's going to have an art component even now because you're planning for next summer already. There could be ways to submit requests to Michael's or Hobby Lobby or places like that that might give you your supplies either free of charge as a way of their giving back, them giving back in the community, or at a significant discount. Those are things you want to put in your application, because the more that you can get sponsored or done through collaborations, that is more money that actually goes to children and youth being in your programs. Let me say that again. It's not that, or let me reemphasize, it's not that the council has a problem paying for the supplies. The supplies are needed to run the camp. But if there is a way that you can show the leveraging of your program, your connection, the work that you do within this community, then that means that more of the council's money goes toward the actual children who are participating in your program. And what does that mean? That can mean you got to hire more staff because now you can get more kids, because your biggest cost is supplies, and you got all of that donated. I will use a specific example because I see Dana on in her program. The program was an entrepreneurial program, and they were going to be providing the campers with computers at the end. Those computers run about $1,500 a piece, depending on where you get them and what you do. So a thought moving forward is, do we look at Best Buy or Staples or Office Depot or Microsoft or Amazon or different organizations that are known to sponsor computers as possibly either giving a deep discount on them or sponsoring them. Now that frees up more money, and it shows that there is truly a sustainability factor and a way that our programs and organizations are looking to maximize. So I did want to say that as we go through this debrief. And then the other thing I'm going to say, which may not be popular, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I don't know how popular I am at this point. Holly touched on this in the beginning. So when you're talking about a summer learning program, you do want to look at your mission as a program and as an organization and ensure that whatever opportunity you are offering aligns with the mission of what you do. What do I mean by that? If you are a sports camp, and that is what you've been doing for the last 5, 10, 15 years, but there's an opportunity for some additional money. If you are now going to add a learning component to your camp, you need to do that through a collaboration, because that is not traditionally what your camp has done. And if you do that through a collaboration, so I'm just going to throw a name out there. Let's say you collaborate with Mathnasium, and they're going to come in and do your math educational component. That shows that there is a collaboration there. And so instead of Mathnasium coming to us for money and the sports camp coming, you are coming together and being efficient and having those components work hand in hand, instead of the sports organization trying to figure out how we're going to do learning when that's not really the mission of what you do. So I think it's also important to note that moving forward, we will be looking at the mission and the work that an organization traditionally does versus what you are offering, and how did you move from this space to this space, and if that makes sense, if the continuum makes sense, so that we can be accountable to the citizens in this county for the money that we are awarding. So I did want to add that, Holly. Thank you for giving me just a little bit here.
Absolutely. And I was trying to find, like, in the PowerPoint, like where it was kind of aligning. So that relevant experience in the collaboration would fit in kind of this section as well as the budget section. But you'll also see that kind of quality programming standards, that's that last piece, kind of thinking through that. If you will recall in the application, if you were really primarily focused on like young people, like we were looking for kind of a literacy component. When I say young people, I mean school age or elementary school. And then the older kids were really looking for that youth development focus or kind of workforce development focus. Those were the 2 priority areas that we identified. If you said, hey, I'm going to serve any kid K through 12, and you only talk literacy, and it was just you by yourself without a collaborative partner, you might not have scored as high in this area versus those who did contribute and say that we're going to have partnerships to be able to diversify. The other thing that we kind of noticed in this area as it relates to the learning narrative was understanding and demonstrating that thorough understanding of nutritional standards. So this is where we saw a lot of programs actually lose points, because they said, we're going to get it catered by this fast food, or we're going to serve pizza, as opposed to having a conversation, as opposed to saying, we're going to work in collaboration with this particular food vendor to ensure, the 5 squares or a full square meal for breakfast and lunch. Or they didn't, the applications did not even include mention of how they were going to kind of like hit what they're doing. So what do I mean by that? We said specifically, we're setting an expectation that this would be your duration and dosage for your summer program. And this is your expectation for how many meals. Some programs or some applications said, I'm going to run a 2-week program, even though we were very clear that our minimum expectation was a 4-week program for a minimum of 4 days a week for a minimum of 6 hours a day. And so we received applications that did not hit those standards. Same thing with food. Either they did not respond to it appropriately, or they just said, yeah, we're going to serve snacks or tell campers to bring their own food. And for many of our reviewers, what they shared was it felt like the applicant did not even read what the expectations were in terms of the actual RFA, and instead went straight to the portal and just sort of describing the program that they already do, as opposed to really understanding what we're looking for and using this as an opportunity to enhance the program that you're already doing. That last piece that Sika spoke about leveraging partnerships really comes into this concept of competitive value. When you're able to let's just say that you're asked for $100,000 and you're going to serve 100 kids. That's a pretty easy calculation of what is the cost per child going to be. Now, if you're able to leverage and bring in community, whatever that might be, from Michael's, or getting a discount on your computers, or in the example of a rental space, having that donated in kind, then you can drop your ask down to maybe only, $80,000. And that means that your competitive value, your cost per child served, is actually going to decrease, so the value increases. So keep that in mind about how much you ask for versus how many children, unduplicated children, you say that you're going to serve, meeting those expectations of duration and dosage. That was really what we were looking for. There were some really cool programs that were suggested, but they were 1-week camps, right? And maybe you offered that 1-week camp multiple weeks, but it wasn't it was just a 1-week camp to a new group of kids each week. Or it was 1 day a week, this group of kids got to go. So it was really only a one touch. It might have been a 4-week program, but it was only 1 day because you were going to multiple neighborhoods across the week. So start with the child in mind of how much you're asking for and what that individual child is going to receive. What the research tells us is that children and youth who have access to high quality summer camp programs that are all summer long are the kids that fare better. That's our goal. That's the goal that we're trying to fill. Many of you had some really cool camps, some of them 2 weeks long, that we would love to see be available. But a 2-week program does not move the needle for where we're trying to get to with the prevention of the summer slide and the improvement of child youth behaviors. For those of you who are coming here thinking about feeding, again, our very first thing is, do you have a thorough understanding of the goals associated with the funding? So as it related to feeding, what we really wanted to see is, what is the gap that you are trying to fill, and how does the service that you're going to provide specifically address that gap? We weren't necessarily looking for brand new programs or different enhancements. What we were really looking for is a thorough understanding of how can we make sure that these specific neighborhoods that have been identified by CSC have the children and the youth and their families have access to very specific foods. Again, I'm going to say for this particular one, a lot of really great innovative ideas emerged in the applications that even got our creative juices thinking about how we can leverage these ideas. And so I'm going to echo what Sika shared a few minutes ago about collaboration of, like, how can you partner? We actually saw a lot of crossover, and there was a lot of discussion about this person's applying here, but they're also being mentioned as being a provider for this application over here. Like, are they talking? Do they know they're both applying? If we fund them, are we in essence doubling, like, would we be paying for both of these when it's the same amount of food? So those are real questions that the evaluators had, that we just can't stress enough, this idea of collaboration and the submission of one application for some of those ideas. Again, on the tiered levels for each of them, Some of the proposals definitely had thought through every question that was asked, including understanding nutritional standards and storage practices. And some of the applications did not. Some of them, the answers were very brief and short that did not demonstrate that knowledge or understanding of these very critical components that we needed to make sure that anything that we're funding has. I think that for the most part, all of the applications included that sufficient personnel or professional staff experience to kind of meet the expectation of the program. So well done on your staffing plans. But again, this idea of competitive value. So thinking through for a feeding component, there was many that wanted to deliver food, like actually have a mobile delivery service. So you know that your competitive value of mobile delivery is going like that cost per unit is going to be much higher than if someone comes to you. And our evaluators definitely accommodated for that. But then there would be line items for packing material or cutlery or silverware, different things like that. Is there an opportunity to leverage donations or leverage other sources for some of that so you can drive down your costs to help increase your competitive value? Those were the types of things that they were looking for. And I'll be the first to say that when you look at the score sheets, it's very hard to offer competitive value when you are applying for a feeding grant in competition with an organization like Second Harvest. So I'll just be the first to say it. That's because they already have all that food delivery and trucks and all of that stuff, and they were just applying for money to buy more food. So their cost per unit of how much food they can deliver, given who they are and their access to the food bank, was of course much lower. That is why they definitely scored at the highest rate. So when you look through the score sheets, you'll see that. But please know that the evaluators took that into consideration. We definitely heard some comments of, well, we're never going to be able to compete with Second Harvest. And we understand that. And as we move forward and thinking through how we make funds available, being able to separate smaller organizations from larger organizations that can recognize those economies of scale like Second Harvest did. But please know that the evaluators did consider that and did have discussions about that as it relates to competitive value. The last section was just about the budget. I think that this was definitely the hardest area for applications. I think that this was judged the hardest by our evaluators and ultimately was judged the hardest by our council. Again, it comes to that idea of a complete cost-effective budget, but really this idea of not supplanting existing funds, as well as evidence of financial stability. And I want to talk about the financial stability for just a moment. Many of the applications were for very large amounts across learning and feeding. And in some cases, those large amounts exceeded a current operational budget. Something that evaluators said on multiple occasions was, I'm very concerned with the ability of this organization to scale so quickly and so fast at that rate, given their current operational budget is a fraction of what they're asking for. This is a 2-month grant that they are applying for, and the amount that they have requested is very, very large. And I think that that goes to this idea of financial stability and not supplanting existing funds because you have such a small program. So as we move forward and offer budget trainings and how you kind of plan to grow your organization, this is something we're really going to be looking at in providing dedicated training to on how to create a strong and competitive budget that definitely gives you the framework for what you want, but also that you have evidence to show that you could sustain that type of investment. the last thing that we would want to do is, grant you a whole bunch of money for this summer, and then something happens the next summer, you're not selected, and you built this reputation because of this huge investment, but you had no way to sustain that investment. So that's something, again, as we move forward as partners in the community together, that we really want to hone in on with you a little bit more effectively, of how do you not only just seek money, but how are you going to sustain any funds that do get invested. I want to just talk about presentations, because this was something that we saw a lot of variety on, and while the presentations themselves were not scored separately, they did weigh into consideration, and on more than one occasion, it was the presentation that actually ended up tanking someone's application as opposed to enhancing. And I know that last summer we didn't do presentations at all, and we heard from the community, you should let us, it shouldn't just be about what's on the paper, let us do a presentation, let us do a presentation. I will tell you that in some cases, those presentations in the Q&A period that happened ended up causing more confusion than the application itself. And that's because not following the most often than not following the guidelines, or not understanding the application and the purpose of the funding in and of itself. So just remember, please show up on time. I think each of you are sent this doesn't refer, I can't see everyone who's on, so this may not have anything to do with you. Chances are, if you're here today, you probably showed up on time to your presentation. But make sure that you are structuring your presentation based on the questions provided. Doing something different made the evaluators get to know you a little bit more and your program a little bit more, but it didn't answer the questions that they needed, and you had very limited time to explain the program that you were offering, how it aligns with the goals of the procurement and what your budget said. And so while it was, for many of you, it was a very creative approach, most of the individuals who chose to do a more creative approach did not actually rise and were selected. They had lots of evaluations in front of them, and they're just the ones scoring. They're not the ones picking and choosing who is most memorable or any of that. So I would just strongly encourage you to stick to the questions that were provided. A lot of you actually got through the questions and then had time left over. So there was definitely a possibility of getting through, but think through those questions, print them out, ask for assistance. Hey, I don't quite understand this question. Can you give me a little bit of clarity? And we would be happy to provide that. Moving forward and thinking about presentations, we do plan to continue to have presentations as part of the process, but we also want to offer some additional training, capacity building around how you give an effective presentation. So definitely look for that. If grant writing is not your thing, we're going to have supports for that. If presenting is not your thing, we're going to have supports for that as well.
Holly, I could not find my mouse to unmute during the budget, but this might be the best place to give this comment. So when you are asking for funding from CSC, the expectation is that when you get funded, if you get funded, that there is not going to be a cost to the participants, that the cost is going to be absorbed by that CSC funding. I will tell you, organizations that said that even with CSC funding, they would still be charging any participants the full price of the camp. It makes the evaluator question, then what is our funding for? If our funding is there to help allow more children to attend the camp or youth, or to expand on some opportunities that you would not be able to provide, then that needs to be shown in the budget. I will use an example. So we did have one funded entity that very clearly said that with CSC funding, if awarded, they would be able to completely sponsor a portion of the kids, and they would be able to reduce the amount of tuition for another portion of the kids. And the kids that they would be sponsoring would specifically come from areas where they knew the parents would not be able to afford the camp. So it is important to know that with CSC funding, it is not to make things cheaper for you. It is to support the cost of a child times however many children to attend your camp. So look at what it costs for a child to attend your camp. You need to bring everything into that equation. You divide it by the number of kids that you plan to serve, and then look at whatever that amount is you want to request that. And that is after you've gotten all your collaborations, after you've gotten your sponsorships, because that's going to knock off this and knock that price off. I don't have to pay rent. I don't have to pay for food. I don't have to. And then you pull that together. The goal when we are targeting these zip codes is for there to be none to very, very little cost for the families that want their children to attend your camp. And if you remember in the application, we ask that if there is going to be a charge after you getting our money, you need to explain to us what that charge is. So I want to be sure to say that, because for some of your organizations, it definitely tanked. And those were specific questions that the evaluators asked. And then those answers came back and it reflected in your scores. So again, you have to think this through so that you ensure that you are showing the best value for the CSC funding. Thank you, Holly.
Of course. And I hope that those were messages that those of you who did participate in the capacity building services that you heard consistently. I know that we included a lot of those messages in the informational session at the very beginning that was available and published on our website. Through our partnership with the Institute for Nonprofit Innovation and Excellence, we hosted 3 webinars, an in-person budget workshop, as well as multiple office hours that provided one-on-one assistance. We did, just so you know, we did ask any to provide us a list of who participated in those webinars and who participated in some of those office hours. Now, it's not a one-for-one, did you participate and you absolutely got funded, but many of those that were not funded did not take advantage of those. We were able to do that cross comparison. That said, many of those that did that are also not here today. So know that we also have post-application assistance. So this debriefing is a great first step. Our next step for offering how to help you strengthen your program design and what you want to do is starting with this debriefing, and then our partnership with United Partners for Human Services. So that is a one-on-one and group cohort listening session. There's going to be a benchmark assessment. Amber just dropped a message into the tab that everyone who is not selected for funding should have received an email. So check your spam folders or your junk folders to see if you got that email directly from Amber herself, inviting you to learn more and to participate in that, that benchmark assessment. And then through UPHS, they'll be doing group cohort training and one-on-one coaching sessions to help you get prepared. As I said, we are going to open the summer 2024 application this fall so that you have a lot more time to really think through how you want to design your program. But please know that just like we increased the level of expectation from last summer to this summer, that's going to continue to increase as we work towards implementing those high quality standards that we know are associated with effective programs. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we are going to entertain any and all questions that you might have.
Please ask questions. Do not be shy. It is important to us that we answer any questions you have. And if you have any suggestions, we want to be able to hear that. While we are the keeper of the funds, we are not the keeper of the be all to end all application process. So we are always looking at ways to increase, to make it better. And if there are things we should be asking that we're not.
Miss C, I see that you have your hand up. If you can come off of mute.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, my lighting is not that. No, I'm not trying to make a movie or anything. Okay, anyway, I think I thought you guys did a really great job of trying to guide folks and give us every opportunity to try to get in front of this. And I appreciate you doing this afternoon. Rarely get any feedback from grants that you don't get. So I appreciate it. It's very helpful. I wanted to just make one suggestion. If you could replace the word feeding with serving. I'm an English teacher, so words have and carry a lot of different messages. And in the world I'm coming from, you feed animals, you serve people. So it just kept driving me crazy that the that the word feeding was in a part of your package, because I wasn't quite sure what that meant about your insights of providing the food. Were you thinking folks who need food or have to be, they fall into the feeding category, or are we serving people? That's the only thing that was driving me crazy. But at the end of the day, I will be taking advantage of all the opportunities that you're presenting to help us get this together. And I'm hoping I can be at most of them. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. C, and thank you for that insight of reflective. I think every time that we go through this process, there's terminology and language that we can all improve upon. I mean, even in our team meeting earlier today, like talking about measures and monitoring and evaluation and reporting, and like we all come to the table with our own understanding. And so I think that being more mindful of that youth development construct that you've layered on for us, now that we've heard it, we cannot unhear it. And right? And just kind of being reflective that if we are going to use a term, that make sure that we include very clear definitions of what we mean.
Thank you.
Shaquaylin, you can come off of mute. There you go.
Hi, everyone. So I do not have a question, but I wanted to say that this was very helpful. I remember my presentation. I know our application up and down, so I know which parts apply to us in our apps. So discernment will take me very far. In the next application, I got feedback from maybe one too many people, and that did sway the way we responded to a few things. So I am interested in next year, just what will be added as far as us having access to someone else coming in to do the presentation, and really sticking to if they are able. They were a very great help with us for the budget, down to really the budget. The budget is where we spent a lot of time with them because it forced us, and you guys saw our budget, how we have it. So they were very, very helpful. That was my first time working with any in that capacity. So I just wanted to say thank you guys, because we are not in a space to become members of any to get that service from them. But again, this was very, very helpful. We will still thrive this year. We got approved for summer break spot. So I know knowing that during our application would have been super helpful. So even though we were not selected, we were still able to make those partnerships and collaborate with outside organizations, and even Starbucks. They selected us as their charity of choice. So we have many things to be covered this summer. So it was still a blessing. Even the night of the announcement being made, parents were dropping off a lot for us. So again, I just want to thank you guys for the opportunity, for giving us, as the access to as many resources as you have, because it still allows us to grow. So I'm looking forward to still building out capacity with UPHS and being on all the other calls and workshops that you guys host, because it does make us better. So when the time is right, we will be selected. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really good to hear because we're such a tiny team that we can't provide all of those supportive services. So that's exactly why we partnered with NAMU PHS. And so if everyone else who's listening didn't hear that, you do not have to be a member of NE or UPHS to take advantage of any of the pre-application capacity building or any of the post-application capacity building for every cycle. And I do believe that we have pre-application assistance and post-application assistance scheduled and like for every application that every procurement that we're gonna do for the next 2 years at least. So know that if you didn't know that those services were available and this is the first time you're hearing about that, please make sure that you pay attention to that, that it's where they get published and all of that. We will share that so that you have access to it. We absolutely want you to have and to take advantage of it. Miss Dana.
Hey there, thank you guys. I appreciate all of the feedback and I thank you for even the suggestions and the examples. It was very helpful. I just wanted to make sure I heard one thing and understand when you mentioned about the applicants that submitted their information and if it was like based on like a 2 or 3 week time period that did you say that you were looking for something that moved the needle more on serving the needs of the kids? I just want to make sure I heard that correctly.
Sure. So that was directly related to duration and dosage. In a high quality summer learning program, the actual best practice standards are 8 weeks, 5 days a week, full days. We added in the serving food component. I'm not feeding the serving food component. We added that in as a way to also address that kids can't learn if they're hungry. So the research says 8 weeks, 5 days a week, full days, right? Like 8 hours a day. That's the eventual goal. Like, let's just be totally transparent. That is the eventual goal for an individual child. So we're not saying a program that's operating for 8 weeks and you're going to take a new cohort of kids every single week. To really move the needle when it comes to prevention of summer slide or the mitigation of summer slide. I don't want to quite say prevention yet. The mitigation of the summer slide and an increase in positive youth behaviors. That's what we're moving towards. But we also understand that if we came right out of the gate and said, we're only going to fund programs that do this, there would be a lot of really awesome programs that are out there that just don't have the capacity to operate at that level. We also understand that COVID had a huge impact on the summer camp workforce, and that there's not a lot of summer camps that are even some of our school district programs are only operating for 4 weeks because they're having a workforce crisis. So that's why we chose to set a minimum standard of 4 weeks, 4 days, 6 hours a day. So programs that did not meet that did have lower scores in their program proposal. And as we move forward, oh, go ahead.
No, and let me also say that having had kids in camps myself, depending on the interest of the kid and the need of the kid, that's how my husband and I tried to figure out which camps they would attend. If we couldn't get them in a full summer camp, and most of the time I will tell you, we put them in a camp where they stayed pretty consistent for the whole summer. They may have left once to go to a volleyball camp, right? And so normally those are in weeks. Not every camp structure is going to be able to meet what it is we're trying to do. And I have to say that because for me, it goes to mission creep. It's another piece of mission creep. So if your camp truly is a 1 week camp, that's what it is. It's a 1 week camp, then it just may not fit what it is we're trying to do. That being said, if you see an opportunity that it can be a 4 week camp, or by next summer, we may extend it a week. Don't quote me on that, but we might say we're looking for 5-week camps. If you see where that could work, start working on that now. Start looking at it now on what it would take and how you are able to truly show the duration and the dosage and match that up with the outcomes by using what we did this summer and anticipating what we might be looking for next summer. It's like a shoe store. You go in the shoe store and you see some really cute shoes and you know, my foot just is not intended for that shoe. It ain't gonna work. I can want it, but it's not gonna work. So it's kind of the same thing. So it's not that, and please don't quote me, don't go out there and say Sika's discouraging people from applying. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is be sure to look at what your camp will do and make sure it's gonna fit what we are trying to accomplish.
I think that's really great advice for every procurement that we produce moving forward. Don't try to shoehorn what you're trying to do into a procurement opportunity simply because you see dollar signs. It will come out in the scores. That's what we're talking about, mission creep and making sure that your program aligns with the goals of the procurement. So I just wanted to piggyback that. Marissa, I see that your hand is raised.
Yes. Hi, again, I echo what everybody else is saying. Thank you so much.
Is it just me? Or is everybody else here?
There's a feedback or something.
Hold on 1 second.
Too many speakers on.
Yeah, that's what it sounded like, that maybe there is, or maybe there's two people on the, somebody needs to just mute their microphone.
Is your phone on?
They're just turning theirs off in the conference room. Is that better?
It's still doing something funky, but let's see if we can get through it.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh, just a quick question. I appreciate you all for having this as well. Can you give a little bit more information about if you're collaborating with somebody who's also applying?
Okay,
I'm
Marissa,
gonna
it's not
repeat that.
working. Yeah,
No.
it's not working.
I think I heard her. I think I
Okay,
heard her speak.
okay.
I think she said, so Marissa, maybe just give me a head nod if I got it. Can we speak a little, provide more information about if you're applying as a collaborative, or if you are applying and you're collaborating with someone who's also applying? Okay. That was rough. I was with you, Sika. It was rough. Okay. So if you are, so I'm going to just speak for and say, for example, you are, and I just happen to know your program a little bit, right? That you are going to provide, that you're going to work with the City Parks and Rec to provide some services, and they offer a letter of support that says, yes, they're going to come in and do this. Now, if the City Parks and Rec had then turned around and also applied and said that they were collaborating with you to do blah, 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 and then now you're both applying kind of for the same thing, that raised eyebrows of the evaluators. Instead, a better application would have been SG Mental Health and City of Tallahassee submitting, and I'm not saying that the City of Tallahassee would ever apply to funds, I'm just using that as a random example, so let me clarify that, that like they submit an application together, right? That maybe there's a lead applicant and the other one's there, so that it doesn't appear that you're also, like you're both applying for the same funds, yet you're saying to one and saying in your application that you have this collaborative support, that they're bringing something to the table. It would be better to submit one application in that sense. There are, however, and I will just kind of share this, there might be an application to use a space, and that space and that individual that's offering a space might also be offering space to other people. I think that in those examples, having clarity so that the collaborator that you're coming to the table with is collaborating with others but they're not applying directly themselves. And I think that that is okay, but make sure that there's clarity. I think it's totally fine for a collaborator who's offering support to this application and this application. I think that's fine, but make sure that there's clarity. Like if one of your collaborators is saying, hey, FYI, you're applying and so is, you know, ABC Mouse, and we're offering to support both of them, I would say that's fine, you can do that. But maybe you say, I'm wondering, what is ABC Mouse doing? Maybe you call them up and say, hey, maybe our application we be strengthened if we collaborate. We already have a common collaborator. How can we leverage each other? And maybe you're able to create economies of scale. I will tell you, some of the applications that we received and some of even the evaluators said, like, these are really cool programs. They're really exciting. It's something we'd like to see. We just like it just needs a little bit more growth. It just needs a little bit more planning. And I think that like they can get there. The other thing that I'll share, and then I'll turn it over to Zika, is those participants. There were several folks who were not selected last summer that took advantage of the capacity building, and they were able to improve their applications, and they were able to share how much they learned. So very similar to what Ms. Whalen said earlier. I'm listening, I'm able to discern, I know that I'm going to come back stronger next year. And I think that that's what we've seen, and we hope to continue to do these types of learning opportunities so that each of you can see yourselves as being our partners.
And if I can add, in some cases, the service you provide might be an accoutrement to several programs. So that would be a matter of going to those programs and saying, this is a service we provide to enhance your program. Would you be willing to write us into your application? And let me further say that if I'm gonna use this example. So one of the things I teach is financial literacy. That's not true. I'm saying, but I teach financial literacy. I'm really not in a position to move out of financial literacy. That's what I teach. I teach budgeting, I teach all of these things, but I could definitely go into other organizations and offer that teaching to their camps or their groups. So I'm going to contact them, tell them, see if they're willing to add that as a component of their programming, and what it costs me to do that is written into their application. And I provide a letter of support saying they are using me as their financial literacy person. And so ABC Mouse is the applicant, but they have these letters from Sika's financial literacy, because she's going to be coming in and doing the financial literacy, from Joe Ellen's kitchen that's coming in to do all of our feeding. So that's the kind of stuff we want you to think about as you think about collaboration. Look at what your strength is as a program, as an organization, what your mission is, what your vision is, and how you can partner with other organizations to meet the goals and objectives that we issue in those applications.
Well said. And I know we're past 5, so if you need to step off, feel free to. We are recording it, so if you won't miss anything, you'll have access to it, and we will send just a copy of the slide deck to everyone who is with us today. Thanks for being here, Karen. Dr. C?
Yeah, I was wondering if, as a part of your follow-up, if we could have a list of the various organizations and the services that they do provide, so that when it is time to collaborate, we can pick up the phone and call and see how we could work together. Because unfortunately, I don't know what everybody does, but I can see where it could be really helpful to kind of approach it from that direction. But I don't have any idea who does what.
We have that's a great suggestion. We have a comprehensive programs inventory that we did as part of our needs assessment that
Okay.
we will be populating and building and publishing on our website. So as soon as I'm going to move that up on the priority list and to get that back published so that you have access to it. Please note that a lot of the information, and Amber is probably smiling about this, a lot of the information in it comes from the 211 database, as well as a whole other plethora of responses and sources. So it might have more programs listed in it than are actually still operating. And some of the contact details are gonna be a year old. So I just wanted to put a caveat. It's like a point in time that when we were able to finally publish that and have as much detailed information, but fortunately we do have plans to through our collaborative with 211 and the United Way and some of our other partners to keep that list up to date. I'll also say that because of our relationship with NE and UPHS, know that they are also an amazing resource. Like that they can help point you to some of that in the interim before we have that list published.
I'm sorry, what are the initials in what?
Oh, NE is INIE. That's the Institute for Nonprofit Innovation and Excellence.
Oh.
They were our partner for our free application capacity building. And then our second is UPHS. That's the United Partners for Human Services. That is that's Ms. Tynan, Amber, that most people just know her as Amber, who's on the call with us today, and she'll actually be coordinating our post-application capacity building assistance. Both organizations are fantastic. UPHS has a very robust membership and kind of like tracking and be able to tell, and we even work with them on our needs assessment where we kind of first gathered that really comprehensive program list.
No, thank you.
Please reach out to them, and Amber's on this call, so, and you should have received an email from her on Monday. So definitely take advantage of the capacity building services we have for you, including how do you build strong collaboratives. And I could be wrong on that, but I feel like that might have been a topic at a recent training, Amber. If it was, feel free to drop in the chat or something that you do somewhat regularly. Yep, I thought so. So how you build collaborations and what does that look like and how do you strengthen those? They also, shameless plug, last week they had an amazing conference where they brought together kind of the nonprofit sector and talk about an opportunity to connect and to build collaborations just in terms of networking. So definitely look into them for that as well. Shaquaylin, did you have one more? I thought I saw your hand pop up.
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to know if there was a way to get our scores from last year as well as this year, just so that I can watch our growth and, take notes as we prepare for next year.
Yes, ma'am. So if you don't mind just dropping me a quick email saying, hey, do you mind sending them to me? It is a matter of public record, so it's already published out there. I will easily send them to you. That's perfectly fine.
Okay.
But I just wanted to let you know and give you the caveat that the evaluators were different. So when you look at the scores, just know that what the scoring criteria was in year one versus what it was this summer, they were different. So just kind of keep that in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. And that's a great idea to kind of see your measurement by scale. So again, we are happy to stay on for a few more minutes as more questions pop up, or you are free to go. I see a couple of comments in the chat where folks had to leave. That's perfectly fine.
So just before y'all get on off, thank you so much. Have a wonderful Memorial Day weekend and know that we are here at any time for you.
Except on Monday. I'm just kidding.
Except on Monday.
Sorry. It's at the end of the day, ladies. I'm just being cheesy.
Thank you.
All right. Bye, everyone.